Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck. You bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to convince you to do it too. Remember that on this program, when we say go green, we're not talking about mere environmentalism, that weak-kneed liberal pablum. We're talking about something deeper, a recognition that we are all interconnected on this web of life. Some people come at that from a eco-spiritual feminist perspective, a indigenous or even a pagan worldview. Some folks come at it from a very hard science, analytical kind of point of view. Or if you're like me and say those are both completely reasonable ways to understand the reality that we are in fact connected, and that whatever we do to this web of life, we're ultimately doing to ourselves. That is what we mean by going green, deep ecology. It's also an unequivocal call that the Democratic Party and the Republican parties have sold us out. They are parties of empire, of capitalism, and that we're going to have to build our own institutions, political institutions, economic institutions, cultural institutions. And boy, I tell you, it is at this point that I am proud to bring my co-host Shane Knight into the conversation, because one redneck to another, Shane. Hey, man, I'm reminded of what Lily Tomlin, the famous philosopher, once said: no matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up with these bastards.
Oh my fucking God. Yeah, it's really getting hard, David, and I'm getting nervous. A lot of the people I've been talking to lately are nervous. I've been going to protest after protests here in New York City, and while the energy is palpable, the upset and outrage is very how do I put this? Present, for lack of a better term. But at the same time, it's just one thing right after the other, and this is week after week after week for us. And I don't know what to do. Like this whole thing, like the latest shitstorm of what was it, the law firm, Paul Weiss law firm. This whole thing where Trump is basically directly coming after a law firm for going after him, and then to sit there and watch them, at least according to this, some of their colleagues. Maybe you could bring this home, but what I've read about it, some of their colleagues are calling them, saying that it's crazy that they would betray themselves for the tune of $40 million worth of, if I read it correctly, pro bono work for a variety of topics that seem to be more in line with the Trump administration's goals, I guess. But there are so many fucking things, and this one really scares me because we just talked to Shahid Buttar a couple of weeks ago, who said courts are not going to save us, and now we're watching law firms roll over and say that they're just not going to bring cases against Trump. And I don't, what the fuck are we going to do, man?
Well, look at here. First of all, the most important thing for us to do is to remain calm, have a clear analysis of where these attacks are coming from. As a lawyer, as you know, I am a lawyer. I was a people's lawyer. So I've sued corporate polluters. I've lobbied elected officials, run for office myself. I've been arrested for nonviolent civil disobedience. I use all the tools, both as a sword and a shield, Shane. And I think it's important that we understand what is actually happening with these legal attacks themselves. Remember that this is the third law firm that Trump has targeted with this executive order. So Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, their former partner, Mark Pomerantz, tried a criminal case against Trump when he worked for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This is the thing that's really important to recognize. So Trump's attack on this law firm is a clear and unambiguous attack on an individual who was at the time a member of the district attorney's office. Now, so that is horrific enough, and a level of attack that we've never seen before, right? But as the Ginsu Knife commercial says, but wait, there's more, because you made the incredible, astute point about the fact that this law firm basically capitulated, and the firm has agreed to pay $40 million in pro bono services to support administration priorities. Let's be clear about this. Pro bono means that the law firm is doing free legal work for the public interest. The firm is not deciding what that means. Trump is. This could not be a more clear and unambiguous example, not just of administrative overreach on Trump's behalf, but literally eviscerating a law firm that has traditionally supported like weak-kneed liberal kind of approaches. These are not leftist by any stretch of the imagination. So you are correct to be terrified by what's happening. And I got to say, it gets even worse because the thing that's got me most concerned as a lawyer is the potential for the invocation of the Insurrection Act. Now, people will be forgiven if you didn't know what the Insurrection Act is. But so let me just lay it out. This is a federal law that was originally passed in 1807. It allows a president to deploy military forces to, quote, suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion within the U.S. So it was passed in 1807, and it has been sparingly used. And when I say sparingly used, let's just be clear. It was invoked during the Whiskey Rebellion, or which was when ordinary farmers were rising up to demand that they be paid for their services during the American Revolution and to fight over the proper scope of the government. It was next invoked in the Civil War. Frankly, both of those instances were using government power rather than address legitimate grievances. Even in the 1950s, it was used to enforce desegregation of the South. But instead of addressing what I would call systemic injustice, it was a use of military force to impose federal mandates. So again, like, not to say that these are not important uses. The last time it was used, 1992, George H.W. Bush invoked it during the Los Angeles uprising, responding once again to racial unrest with force rather than reform. So it's only been used a handful of times. What makes this profoundly chilling is that we see Trump, who has already instructed his various agencies to write up the potential use of these, and given Trump's frequent rhetoric about, quote, law and order, his past use of force during the protest, I think that there's a very strong likelihood that he's going to invoke it, especially if he does, in fact, face widespread opposition to his horrific policy. So all to say, Shane, we ought to be terrified and we ought to be getting ready for it rather than just quaking in our boots.
Well, I wish I had more of a clear idea of what it meant to get ready for it, because as a former Marine myself, it's a little different looking at the scenario. I'm fortunate to see a lot of veterans come out and say that, hey, it's not going to get that bad. We're going to stand by and do the right thing. And I've been saying that for years, but at the same time, I don't know anymore. I don't know anymore. Plus, you couple that with everything else that's been going on, like individual green card holders in this country being detained for no reason, all those horrific stories. And even the whole thing about, what's this guy that was 82 years old that had his Social Security payment withheld from Musk and his little Doge dickheads. Excuse my language. I shouldn't say that, but forgive me for that. But at the same time, we at least we've got somebody here with us today that's doing something about helping organize and sift through all this craziness as it's happening.
We do. It is my distinct pleasure to bring Joe Guinan into this conversation. Joe Guinan is, frankly, a brilliant thinker, writer, strategist. Joe Guinan is the president of the Democracy Collaborative. I will say, as I often do, to name it, I consider Joe Guinan a personal friend. He also wrote a book that kind of blew my mind. He was very active in Jeremy Corbyn's campaign. And he wrote a book that really opened my eyes up called People Get Ready, which was literally a recognition that it's not enough to just have good policies. We've got to incorporate a level of political education so that ordinary working class people understand what their role is and should be. So with that, I'm going to welcome Joe Guinan. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure to be with you both.
So Joe, I'm going to just get right to it because you at the Democracy Collaborative have created a tool that I am using already and am so grateful for it. It's called Tracking the Crisis. And I love the sideline, y'all. Check this out. We read the news so you don't have to. Joe, tell us about Tracking the Crisis.
Yeah, so Tracking the Crisis came about because, we were experiencing the same head spinning anxiety that you've just been talking about, given the moment that we're in. Just the sheer barrage of information as this assault unfolds really against the U.S. administrative state across a whole array of fronts. And for us, as we tried to get our mind around what was happening and digest the information, we dug in a little and we understood that actually the sense of being overwhelmed is partly a deliberate strategy that's being deployed. And I don't know if you remember, but going back to an interview that Steve Bannon did in 2019, he talked about flooding the zone. I'll just read you the quote from Steve Bannon. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover, but we've got to start with muzzle velocity. And so for us, in the face of all this muzzle velocity, all this activity, we realized we needed a way to control the information and our absorption of the information in a way that didn't just leave us spinning and unable to carry on with our work and do the building and the creation of the alternatives that needs to happen. So together with some allies at the People's Network for Land and Liberation, we put our minds to it and we came up with this tool, Tracking the Crisis. And you can find it if you go online at trackingthecrisis.org. And what it is essentially is a news aggregator and roundup. Each week we look at the Trump administration's administrative, legislative, and other actions. And then we also survey the broad array of movement responses that are emerging. And we package that all and deliver just one email per week into your inbox, which catalogs all the intervening developments of the previous week. So in a way, it's a psychological as well as a news aggregation tool. It allows us to consume the information all at once, just in a kind of 15 or 20-minute read, if that's what we need to do, and not feel that we have to be in a constant cycle of reactivity or responding to this outrage manufacturing machine, which is at the heart of what's going on at the moment.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I got to tell you that for me, it was like let's remember, I know, Shane, you're a former Marine, right? And hell, I grew up in Texas. At 8 years old, they basically issue you a 410, right? So, so muzzle velocity, y'all, what that means, it's the speed at which the projectile leaves the barrel of the gun. So that when Bannon, fascist that he is, talks about muzzle velocity, what he's talking about is boom, 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 boom. And that's the quote shock and awe that we're experiencing. And it is a way for the Trump administration and the fascists that they are to try to use the legal system to legitimize what they're doing. Because one of the things that I want to lift up that I'm seeing in some of the comment section is, hey, about this Insurrection Act and why hasn't it already been done before? Or why haven't they already done it? It's because there is still a requirement that there be a 90 days for the various agencies to respond. That's why if you take a look on social media, you will find April 20 is the day that everybody is tracking, because that's the 90-day mark. So this is when both the Department of Defense, the Department of Human Services, and other agencies are required to submit their report to Trump on both border security, immigration, and various and sundry policies that are likely to be the ones most uh, generating the most outrage and the most pushback. Now, so, Joe, I do want to circle back on this tracking the crisis, because to me, it's not just a clever quip, right? You read the news so I don't have to, because I was feeling overwhelmed. I wasn't shocked because I knew it was coming out of this neo-fascist, but I was awed at two things: the speed at which he took over the entire Republican Party and the capitulation of the Democratic Party. And what you were able to do was to at the Democracy Collaborative, the tracking the crisis. I love how you've categorized things in a way that I can follow it, and you're tracking not only what Trump is doing, but the legal response, the movement response, the media response. Again, I would love for you to share a little bit about how you're doing that.
Yeah, I have a question too. If you could just go through what David said, but also elaborate for me, if you wouldn't mind, on the movement tracking part of it, because I think want to make sure people have a clear understanding of where they can go and what they can do in response to all this horse shit. Because a lot of people don't know how to get involved or where. So
No,
with that,
absolutely.
yeah.
So really, it's about information management, right? There's so much going on all at once that what we do is sift through and find the. By we, I'm talking about the Democracy Collaborative. We've got an excellent editor of Tracking the Crisis, Mel Figueroa, who I know is going to be with you on a future show, and we really do read all the news so that you don't have to, sorting through all the mainstream publications as well as more politically engaged outlets, and finding the stories and organizing them around the key themes each week in terms of where the new assaults are coming, where the changes and challenges are emerging, and also critically, and this goes to what you're asking about, Shane, what people are doing in response, right? One of the early stories that we heard time and time again was that this time around, there seemed to be a kind of quiescence, less of a public display of resistance to what was unfolding, just because there wasn't some big march in Washington, D.C. with everyone in pink hats, right? And what we're finding is that there's an extraordinary array of activity, whether it's by public sector unions and federal employees that have been laid off, or whether it's by groups that are organizing protests around Tesla and targeting Elon Musk in that way, or whether it's the litigation that's coming out of state attorneys general or from civil rights groups and others that are filing suits. And so what you get each week is a pretty long, and it's still pretty overwhelming, I have to say, a collection of all the stories, so that you don't have to pay attention 24/7 all the time to the news cycle, knowing that if you miss something, it'll be there in the aggregator and you can keep track of it. And it's all on the website, trackingthecrisis.org. And what you're kind of seeing unfold, almost like a photograph emerging in a dark room, is really the strategy of this administration and the changes that they're trying to bring about to the parameters of the state, to the functions of the state, and whose service it's operating in, all in aid of, I would argue, and this is where I take off my official hat and just speak personally, but I think this is really about stripping the U.S. administrative state of the functions that it's been serving that actually do still serve people, to the point where soon they'll be able to point to the state and say, you're paying all your taxes, what are you getting in return? Practically nothing. The thing has been smashed. It doesn't work anymore. And it's another run at shrinking the U.S. state that the conservatives have failed to do time and time again since Reagan. But this time they've got a different strategy for trying to do it.
And I'm going to jump in because remember, who was it who Grover Norquist famously said, the conservative approach was to shrink government small enough so that it could be drowned in the bathtub. Well, what the Trump administration is doing is trying to put a shotgun to it and just utterly eviscerate it. So, Shane, I want to really drill down on the second part of Shane's question, and that is, what about the movement tracking part? Because one thing that the neoliberal corporate media and the weak-kneed liberals are not covering is the fact that there is, in fact, a resistance forming. It it's harder to see because typically the opposition party would lead it, as opposed to Schumer and his Neville Chamberlain-esque appeasement policy. What you're seeing is fight back that's coming up from the bottom up.
Very much so, and you see this in in almost every state as you go around looking at actions that unions are taking, that communities and working people are organizing. We're seeing protests like the Tesla protests, but also wider corporate boycotts. And boy, does that begin to hurt. And you can tell that that's really got under their skin by the actions that they're taking in response to some of that, even setting up an FBI task force I was reading today to go after whoever is organizing the Tesla protests. And so there is the beginnings of resistance forming. I think one of the things that we at TDC will be looking for as we're putting together these roundups on a weekly basis is really looking at whether anyone is stepping into the opening that's starting to be created. And what I mean by that is, on the one hand, we would absolutely lament a lot of the things that are happening to the US state, which is not just an attempt to roll back the Great Society and the New Deal, but really kind of going at some of the very basic functions of the modern state, going back to Teddy Roosevelt or the progressive era, attacks on the National Park Service and the Forestry Service, the ability to manage wilderness or forests or public parks. And of course, we lament that there's been this stripping away of rangers and oceanographers and financial regulators. But we also recognize that, for a long time now, there's been a net negative effect of the U.S. state on people's lives. And this is what, in many ways, Trump and Musk and the whole right-wing assault is seeking to exploit. And so for us, there will come a moment, I think, when it's clear that a lot of this stuff is being swept away and is unlikely to be brought back. Certainly on the left, I'm not sure we would want to bring back some of the ways in which the state has typically functioned. And that does begin to open up as we see this assault on the Constitution, this dismantling and wrecking of the capitalist administrative state. It opens up possibilities for thinking about what a more democratic polity and economy might actually look like. What if we were to start building a true commonwealth to put in the place of what's being wrecked before us? And so I think for me, we're not there yet, but that's something very much we're going to be looking to identify as the various strands of resistance come together and create an analysis of what's happening and what needs to be done, not just to resist, but also to build an alternative.
Well, Joe, you have literally set us up for the next topic that I wanted to make sure that we discussed with you, and that is the framework of community wealth building. Because frankly, that's how you and I first got to know each other. And I remember, I am a explicit post-capitalist. I believe that we need a new political economy that creates goods and services for human use rather than merely private gain. I don't make any bones about being a proud and unapologetic redneck eco-socialist. But what I found about community wealth building that was so inspiring was very concrete ways to put a democratic economy into practice without having to, quote, seize the means of production, right? So I'm going to invite you to describe what the heck is community wealth building and why is somebody like me so excited about it?
Well, thank you for asking about that. Community wealth building is a big part of what we've been doing at the Democracy Collaborative for a good part of the 25 years that we've been in existence. And for us, community wealth building, which is a term that we actually created ourselves, is an economic development model that's really about transforming local economies based on giving communities direct ownership and control of their own assets. And really, it's set up in diametric opposition to the sort of failing traditional neoliberal corporate economic approaches that we've seen in economic development for a long time. Instead, what we're doing with community wealth building is really figuring out a way to strike at the core of wealth inequality in the economy by building a new economy from the bottom up. And what community wealth building does is look around in any locality, any city, municipality, regional economy, and identifies that there's already a tremendous amount to work with in terms of working towards a new system of political economy, a post-capitalist economy being born, if you like, in the interstices and cracks of the existing order. So community wealth building takes progressive elements of economic organization like public banking or worker co-ops or progressive procurement policies or community land trusts and many more, and knits them together and supercharges their power really by connecting them and scaling them in such a way that we can begin to affect the operations of the entire local economy in a way that changes people's lives and alters the economic future of our communities. And a big piece of how we go about doing this is recognizing that there's already a pretty substantial share of any given local economy that's already potentially susceptible to democratic economic control. So if you look at local government, state government, K through 12 education, higher education systems, the nonprofit healthcare sector, charitable institutions, other institutions, cultural institutions that are anchored in place and are unlikely to up and leave, and you begin to map them out, you see that you're actually talking about something that starts to get towards a quarter, a third maybe, of any local regional economy. And if only we were to go about deploying the resources of these institutions, particularly the larger ones, what we call anchor institutions, big place-based entities like hospital systems or local government that aren't going to move, and repurpose their procurement, their investment, their use of land and housing assets, the way that finance flows in the local economy, we can begin to build a new configuration of economic institutions that in and of themselves start to produce more sustainable and equitable economic outcomes. And what that gets us out of is the bind that I think the liberal left has been in for a long time, looking to use either the tools of redistribution through tax and spend, which is running into political difficulties and has been for a long time, or regulation, which really tries to clean up after the fact, after the economy has done its thing. Instead, what we're trying to build with community wealth building is a different set of relationships and institutions in the economy that naturally produce greater economic equality, greater democratic control, more ecological sustainability, and an ability to deploy our assets and our wealth for the benefit of the community as a whole, and not just for the wealth of the billionaire class.
So, Joe, you've gotten a couple of fantastic responses. Michael Nugent, who is a frequent viewer and listener, has talked about some of the work that he's seeing in Brooklyn and how it's empowering a very poor person of color community. And I also want to lift up, there you go. Michael says, throw it back up on that lower third. I love it. There's a community wealth building where I live in a poor section of Brooklyn that's also trying to set up a community council. Seems like a very positive development. So there's your roses, but there's also another listener, viewer, Patricia, who I thought had a fantastic challenge to us. Patricia says, yeah, but what about when there's no time for slow development? What about people who are on the verge of losing their homes and more in some cases? Do you have any work in mutual aid? So this is an invitation to you, Joe, to talk about community wealth building and mutual aid. Are they opposed to each other? Are they contradictory? Like, how could they work together?
No, absolutely. In fact, one of the councils that we were working with in Scotland, in North Ayrshire, which is outside of Glasgow, a post-industrial area that was really rolling out its own community wealth building program. When COVID hit and the economy shut down and people were in immense distress, what we saw there was an immediate pivot from what was essentially this longer sort of range, medium-term strategy for the slow, steady build-up, as your viewer was noting, of alternative institutions, to a much more rapid response situation where all the school lunch capacity that was available to the council there was put into feeding programs that would send out food parcels and care packages to people that were in danger of not being able to get enough to eat during the onset of that crisis and before some of the larger government programs were put in place. And I think that's just one example of many. I think what we're challenged to do in this moment is to move from the medium-term horizon to toggle back and forth to the emergency response, and the fact that we're actually going to have to figure out ways to make existing resources that are ours to control at the local level, at the state level, that don't depend not only on federal largesse, but even on federal cooperation, and to put pressure now on our elected officials to do everything that they can to help shield communities, workers, the vulnerable from the assault that's unfolding from above. And so I think there's a really complementary role for a community wealth building approach that really tries to take control and repurpose and direct so much of the local economy in a different way into that kind of emergency response. And also, frankly, to begin laying the economic basis for a political coalition that's capable of pushing back against everything that we're seeing at the moment, of actually knitting together not just unions in the public sector, the private sector, but also local government officials and community organizations, and probably even the civic-minded local business community that has a lot to gain from the relocalization of economic activity, and begins to knit together a new fabric that can hold a different kind of politics at the local and state level and begin to work up from there. And it reminds me, of course, of what the conservatives and the right were able to do over periods when they weren't in control of the White House, although, of course, they were still in control of the institutions of the economy, but they focused on local level activity, on state level activity. And that's really a thing that we should be doing now to build up a genuine alternative to what's happening, so that we're ready to move into the spaces that open up and to capture people's hearts and minds by providing for their bellies.
So I love it, and I will say, Joe, this conversation has invoked Milicia Figueroa, or Mel, who is an architect, if you will, or a co-creator of Tracking the Crisis. Mel will actually be joining this program next week, where we'll be diving deep with her. But one of the things that she pointed out in the comments section that I want to lift up to get your take on, and she's talking about Peter Thiel, talking about building a crypto-techno-feudalist free trade zone where corporations can run amok without regulation. And I'm going to ask you to reflect on that. And this is my invitation to you to talk about the Democratic front, not the Democratic Party or the Democrat Party, but a democracy front as a way to react to this techno-feudalism.
Yeah, absolutely. This, I think, requires us to understand the moment that we're in, right? And to me, what is significant about the Trump-Musk assault is that, in many ways, it's impossible to argue that the U.S. economy, as it's currently operating, is anything but broken for the vast majority of Americans. And frankly, if you don't believe that, go and look at the data in our Index of Systemic Trends, which is a publication we bring out every 5 years. We brought one out, second edition, last year, and it just shows data point after data point, whether it's productivity versus wages, or wealth or income inequality, or the ways in which different parts of the American system are operating for people. Just the sheer systemic failure on so many fronts of the moment. And that presents a real political challenge for the right, who I think we would argue have been having it their way on economic policy one way or another, whether there have been Republicans or Democrats in the White House. We've seen trade liberalization, globalization, the ascent of corporate power, the rolling back of trade unions and trade union rights, and so forth. And so they have a bit of a problem, because they can't claim that things are working, and yet they can't really defend the continuation of the policies that have been in place for the last 40 years. And so what we're seeing now, in the absence of a proper alternative being proposed and advanced by the left, at least on a sufficient enough scale, is an attempt to break out of this kind of stalemate where over a long period of time, they haven't really been able to shrink the state in the way that you were talking about there, David, that Grover Norquist was talking about. They've repurposed parts of it, but it's still, of the same order of magnitude as it has been for a long period of time. And so this is a genuine attempt by the right to burst out of the bounds and the limits, which include, frankly, the limits placed by democratic politics on corporate power, and to establish a kind of a next version of their utopia of the market. And some of the ways in which this is being approached is what Mel's talking about, the idea of carving out these spaces, these sort of free trade zones or export processing zones, or the various different zones that are being proposed by sort of neoliberalism on crack, really, where you completely do away with environmental regulation. You slip the leash of whatever remains of labor law, and it's supposed to be a capitalist bounty that then would be unleashed and could be repurposed. But we all know that that's not how that's going to work out in the long run. And so what we really have to do is understand that the right is acting out of necessity because they're running out of road in the existing system. People can see that. And so it's even more incumbent now upon us, I think, to begin to offer alternatives that can meet the scale of the crisis and begin to put in place something that looks like what you were talking about earlier, David, a post-capitalist political economy that knits together a lot of the progress that we've made, the institutions that we've developed, the knowledge that we have, that's beginning to start to look like the mosaic of a democratic economy in the making. And that's the game that's on at the moment. And we are way behind, and they're way out in front. But we've got a lot of things in our favor if we join the battle properly.
And on that tip, I want to bring up another point that Mel made, and I love this idea: build safe harbors, not unlike the pirate enclaves back in the days at the dawn of capitalism. I mean, this idea of pirate republics or liberated zones or just ordinary people coming together, and as Patricia talked about, doing a version of mutual aid. I have no illusion that we can merely mutual our way into restructuring the entire economy. But what we can do is create examples of what cooperation does. And we make the idea of socialism not only like pure, sort of politically and theoretically attractive, but to say, actually, all we're doing, Shane, is talking about how you and I grew up, right?
I know. I just saw this comment from Normalized Audio, and I love this analogy: open source communities versus techno towns. Because I don't know if you know anything about computer code, but the open source idea, I think it's a great analogy. I want to thank them for that. Yeah.
So, Joe, what do you think, man? Can we actually use community wealth building and mutual aid? Can we build liberated zones or pirate enclaves enough that we can experiment with meeting our needs in a post-capitalist way? That I think is really the challenge for us.
I mean, to me, there's been a kind of golden age of left economics recently, where the thing that we're missing is not the models, is not the evidence base. You can go to any city in the United States and find cooperatives or land trusts or social enterprises or mutual aid programs or ways that people are organizing together around different ways to democratize the state, whether it's through participatory budgeting or alternative local currencies, and all of this great wealth of institutional knowledge has been built up and is available to us. To me, the challenge, and this is, I think, where we need to go next, is to build a politics of this. So on the one hand, I'm 100% supportive of the building of models wherever we can do. There's benefits to be had immediately for the people that are involved in them, and wider political gains to be had from demonstrating what is possible and from showing the reality and the viability of the models that are being developed. But what is needed, I think, is now a way to start to generalize this into a new common sense, if you like, to use the Gramscian terminology. And one of the things that we automatically do, I think, when we're trying to engage in sense making around moments like the current moment we've got, is reaching for past analogies, for historical models. And I think a lot of people, myself included, are turning to the 1930s and looking at what happened with the rise of fascism then, and what are the lessons that there are for us to take away from that. And I think there's something um, uh, troubling and problematic about some of those analogies for the moment, because the balance of forces today is nothing like the balance of forces that existed socially and politically in the 1930s. And that's why, on the one hand, I don't think we can pursue the model that's often referred to as the Popular Front. The Popular Front was essentially a broad front alliance between the left, liberals, Democrats, to try and resist fascism. It didn't really work, actually, if you look into the history and the way that people are deploying it today. And quite frankly, I don't think that we've got enough centrists and liberals that we can trust to stand with us against fascism to make a Popular Front model viable. So the other alternative that's trotted out from left history is the United Front. That's where the left comes together, puts aside sectarian differences, strengthens our own program and our own push, and tries to move forward on the basis of a united left. The left, I don't think, particularly in the United States at the moment, is anything like strong enough to carry out a united front strategy.
I got to stop too, because I hear a lot of folks that I otherwise work with talk about now's the time for a united front. And I have to be really clear. It's like that means that you need to have a left, right? And the left, at least if it means anything, it has to be post-capitalist. The reality is that the Democratic Party, the Working Families Party, are parties of empire. They are parties of capitalism. So this idea of a united front does not apply, which is why this idea of a democracy front, an organic bringing up from below, I think is the right approach. And it invites me to bring forward Michael Nugent, who is another frequent listener and participant, who I think asks a very astute question. Michael says, look, we live in a system organized into nation states. Community wealth building may be an alternative to seizing the means, but that is the means of production. But will we still need to be a post-capitalist state in a system of states? I mean, this is the level of theoretical query that I think, again, I don't want to just be in our heads, but I want to win a new world. I don't want to just critique. I want to think about what it actually means. So I'm wondering, Joe, if you've got any response to Michael's question.
Well, there's certainly not going to be a way to leapfrog over all the questions we're struggling with at the bottom-up level. There's no royal road to what comes next. We have to put in the hard yards and do the work of building this notion of a democratic front from below, a building together of all the forces that we need, including people that wouldn't identify themselves as being on the left, but are up against it in terms of the sharp end of the crisis, and also are frankly looking at a future in which they're being counted among what the Davos people at the World Economic Forum are starting to call surplus populations, right? And I think that's probably the vast majority of the world on the Davos model in the future. And so a democratic front would begin to assemble all those forces and begin to do the popular education around the provisioning of needs, of the common sense institutions that we can advance to begin to build a democratic economy. I think the potential for that goes way beyond the bounds of anything that we've thought of historically as being the left. When it comes to the international picture, this is where it starts to get very complex and very dangerous very quickly. We're certainly at an odd moment in American empire, where on the one hand, power is being projected in the Middle East and will continue to be in the usual way, but there's a pulling back from some of the alliances of the post-war period by which American empire and hegemony has been maintained. And we're also starting to see multipolarity breaking out for real, with the BRICS and the possibilities of alternative payment systems that would begin to challenge dollar hegemony and so on. And so for the left, we're going to have a real challenge to navigate what's going to be very, very complex, shifting terrain globally, and finding the alliances that we need to make. And I think the absolute North Star pole for us in that has got to be a critique of American empire and imperialism, and the new form that it's taking may not look like NATO. It may not look like Joe Biden and the recent wars in Ukraine and Gaza. It may look like the beginnings of new land grabs in Greenland and Panama and Canada, and the sort of retreat hemispherically to a grab for natural resources, for water, for sea lanes and trade routes, and so on. And so we're going to have to be absolutely rock solid, crystal clear that we cannot get on board with moves towards rearmament as ways of creating domestic jobs. We've got to dismantle empire, both as our immediate enemy, but also the enemy of so many people internationally. What that leaves us with in terms of a nation state system globally remains to be determined. But the clear path is the democratization of the institutions that we've got, starting from the bottom up and eventually, hopefully, reaching the national level in many countries around the world. And then what begins to be the associations of democratized power, and how we can use that to stand up for the rights of the majority of the people in the world in the face of climate change, migration, and all the other threats that we're seeing.
You know, Joe, we're coming to the end of the program. I do want to lift up another comment from a frequent viewer listener. Lilia writes, back in the 19th century, Edward Bellamy wrote a book that became a bestseller not only in his day but for decades to follow. Bellamy clubs were formed to talk about what that future could look like. I'm sure that literati that you are, you know that that's looking backward. I'm wondering if there's any lessons to be learned from that.
Well, you know, my mentor and the founder of the Democracy Collaborative, Gar Alpovitz, likes to say that, you know, for large periods of time in history, ideas, while they're important, don't really matter. It's political power, it's wealth, and other sort of brute force that tends to carry the day. But at moments like the present, where we're at a hinge between the dying of the old and the birth of something new, ideas can have tremendous force and political power. There's, I think it was it Zola who said that not all the armies in the world can hold back the march of an idea whose time has come. And I think what we need to be in the business of creating are ideas whose time has now come. We know the problems. We can do our over-analysis of capitalism. What we actually need to do is project very clearly for people a viable, attractive, possible, and reachable alternative future based on what we know already works here in the United States and around the world, and invite people in to participate in the realization and creation of those visions. And so I think it's a very powerful question and a really important way of guiding our thinking. We need to be offering something that is so attractive and compelling that will help people navigate all the nonsense and the air war of shock and awe that we're seeing from the right at the moment, and be able to set the course for themselves, for their families, for their communities, towards the kind of economic system that we need and frankly are in a position to build.
And this is the reason why I will continue to talk about the need for very concrete examples of meeting our needs and having clarity on the vision. I forget who it was who said, but I really live by this adage that it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new level of acting. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the Democracy Collaborative, about the community wealth building, about the next system studies that y'all are doing is pointing people to very concrete, achievable things that in and of themselves may not be the transformation or the answer, but if they're part of an overall strategy, they are a path forward, a strategic orientation that leads us to cooperate together, that leads us to collaborate together, that leads us to meet our tangible needs as opposed to merely being theoretical. And everybody knows I consider myself an organic intellectual. I love to chop it up with theory, but I often say I don't study theory to be a good movement Trivial Pursuit player. I study theory because I want to win a new world. So look at here, y'all. We are coming to the end of the program. Shane, you've got some exciting things to talk about, I know, and I want to make sure to give you that opportunity. But before we lose Joe, I want to give you the opportunity for any final thoughts or conclusions as we come to the end of the show.
I think there's a vacuum that we need to fill in terms of hope, in terms of models, in terms of strategy in response to what we're facing. And frankly, the fact was, and things like our index of systemic trends show it, the old system was on its last legs anyway. What Trump and Musk are doing is giving it a push, is clearing the way for a much darker vision of what they want to put in its place. I think that opens up the space, if only we can move into it, to begin to point towards a very powerful, practical, achievable next system that actually looks like a lot of things that are around us all the time. 1 in 3 Americans is in a co-op, right? That hasn't translated into political self-consciousness as cooperators, but there's stuff to build on, stuff to work with, right? And this is not just a little thing here or a little experiment there. There is so much activity all around the United States that we can begin to knit together into an alternative. And I think we've simply run out of the possibility of continuing on the path that we were previously. We're either going to go in the Trump-Musk direction, or we're going to create a new one for ourselves. So that's the work of the collaborative and all our allies, and would invite people to join us. Sign up for trackingthecrisis.org. Get your manageable digest of what's happening around you, and then roll up your sleeves and get to work in your own communities and with the institutions that are just within reach already. And let's start building that democratic economy that we all need. Thanks for having me, Shane. Thanks for having me, David.
All right, Joe, what a fantastic conversation. And one of the things that I want to actually point out is that the Redneck Gone Green program is an independent program, but we have joined the Democracy at Work platform, which is not merely a place where we can have what Gramsci would call unsanctioned conversation about common sense, as important as that is. But Shane, this platform is growing, and I'm really excited to have some role in it. So I want to kick it to you, because you're not just a co-host of Redneck Gone Green. You're actually engaged with Democracy at Work. So I want to turn the microphone over directly to you.
Well, thank you, David. Yeah, my day job is I am the co-manager and chief creative officer of Democracy at Work. I've been involved with the organization almost since its beginning in one way or the other. And it's been a very joyous week for us at Democracy at Work, a very busy week for us. But over the last 9 days, I think, 8 or 9 days, we crossed a very important milestone for us. We just got over 500,000 YouTube subscribers to our YouTube channel, which
Hold on. You didn't say that with enough hoopla. 500,000 fucking subscribers. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I remember when we first started putting Economic Update with Richard Wolff on YouTube. I remember setting that up with them years ago. We had no idea what the fuck we were doing. We had no idea where we were going. And a lot of the things we were doing, based on our collective experience together. But it was very, very exciting, especially for Professor Wolff. I was there the moment it clicked over and was able to show it to him, and he was very enthusiastic about it. And I do want to say a big thank you to everyone in our audience that has participated through Democracy at Work in some form or the other. And if you haven't, please do go check out our YouTube channel. We just launched a new program called Friends of Democracy at Work, where we are bringing other like-minded organizations and individuals together to sort of share our platform, but also cross-promote the work that we're all doing so that we can expand everyone's reach and help reach people in this dire time, to give them courses of action, things they can do, places to get involved that will make a difference. As Joe just pointed out, it's not going to be one small place here or a place over here. It's going to be everybody all together. And our work at Democracy at Work has been to grow the network as best we can, to use what we've got so that everybody can get the things they need so that we can all get through this horse shit together.
Everything Everywhere All at Once. Not just a fantastic movie, but it's a good exhortation to what we got to be doing. Looky here, Shane. This conversation has got me fired up. And I'm also really, I feel really blessed that Malicia Figueroa, Mel, was actually active in the chat with us. And she's going to actually be joining us next Monday. So I do want to invite folks to remember to join the community. Redneck Gone Green is not merely a platform, although I'm proud of the platform that we are building. I really do believe that we are building a community of people who share core principles and values, who have a GSD or get shit done kind of attitude, that we're not waiting for anybody to come and save us. And one thing, Shane, that you and I as two rednecks know, when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do, stop digging, right? We got to stop thinking that the voting for Democrat Party is going to somehow magically transform anything. So I'm not going to fuss at people like you vote how you want to vote. But I do know this, that if all you ever do is vote every 2 or 4 years and you think some magical transformation is happening, you're wasting your time. I do think that there is a role to be played in voting as a tactic, but at the end of the day, we've got to build worker-owned cooperatives. We've got to decommodify land using community land trust and limited equity housing cooperatives. We've got to use art and culture and storytelling. We've got to build community production centers. We've got to do mutual aid. The good news is all of that is happening. The bad news is it has not yet knitted itself into one coherent political economy. And that's what I think the Democracy at Work platform can do for us.
I think you're right, David. And I'm excited about all the things that you mentioned that are coming together. And I've had phone call after phone call with group after group over the last week. I'm excited about things moving forward, just as I am nervous about the way things are going. But
right on. Well, looky here, y'all.
All in all, it's hopeful.
We are coming to the end of the program. So at this point, I'm just going to conclude with, you guessed it, like, comment, subscribe. Remember that I write a weekly Substack called, coincidentally, Redneck Gone Green. We have just hit over 4,300 subscribers on that writing. So if you're not yet subscribed on Redneck Gone Green, the Substack, please do that so you'll get a writing. It'll introduce each guest, each topic, and then we get on here and then just chop it up with that guest. So I'm going to wish everybody a good night. I'm going to say thank you for what you're doing. Keep your powder dry. Keep on keeping on. Peace.